Hello and welcome to Melbourne AWS User Group episode 106. Coming to you from a cold Melbourne. It's just one day out of lockdown. Hooray! We did it again. Number 5 in the books. Hopefully we get our free coffee if we get stamped on the next one. See how we go. We're here for another night. Obviously we're not back in person and we probably don't know when that's going to be. It'll be sometime, hopefully, maybe. See how we go. But for now, let's talk about tonight and what we've got coming up. So our agenda for this evening, right now I'm doing the introductions bit. I never get this right. 4 months, I never get it right. Right now we're doing the introductions. Coming up after that, we'll have our What's New segment, also known as Ian and Friends, joined by Guy Morton again this month. They'll talk through what's new in the land of AWS since the last time we spoke, so a month ago. Then up at 6:50 or straight after that, Scott's going to take us through the AWS CI and CD tooling, which looks like it's going to be a really good one. And then after that, we'll have Michaela talking cloud infrastructure for cloud infrastructure. Again, another great talk. We've have a great depth of quality in this community, and it's always fantastic to see first-time speakers for us come in to share their knowledge, and we're really looking forward to seeing what we've got tonight. If this is your first time watching us, welcome along. We do things a little bit differently virtually to what we would do in person. No surprises there. We don't, obviously can't interact very directly with our presenters, and having them try to watch a text chat or something like that to capture questions is a bit difficult. But we do encourage you to ask questions. You can post questions in our Slack channel, hashtag or #Melbourne. We'll post the Slack details will come up in a slide in a minute. You could ask on Twitter at hashtag AWS or right there in the chat on YouTube where you're watching, whatever works for you. And then at the end of each presentation, myself or my co-host Ian, who you'll meet in a minute, we'll jump on the stream with the presenter and we'll ask those questions on your behalf. So it's still a great way to get your questions answered if you do have any, and try and see how we go. We also welcome comments, feedback, all of the usual stuff. Either there in the chat where you are on YouTube or in our Slack is a great place to do it. Now, we wouldn't be able to put any of these on without our sponsors, and we've had a bit of a change in our sponsor lineup from this week or this month. So before I keep going, I want to say great thank you to Enabler, who have been our gold sponsor for the past 2.5 years. They stuck with us through COVID and the change from in-person events to virtual events, and they've stuck around and they've supported the community throughout that time. So a big thank you to them before we move on, as well to our departing silver sponsors, Do It International and AC3. One of our silver sponsors, though, from last year has stuck around and has elected to sponsor the group for the rest of this year as our gold sponsor, and that's CMD. So huge thank you to them, not only for sticking around and supporting the community, but for doing so at such a trying time. So just in general, if this is your first time hearing about this, our sponsors pay for all of the infrastructure costs they put into running these events. And then when we get back in person, they obviously help cover things like catering and support staff and stuff like that. Putting these events on does consume quite a bit of capital, so we're very grateful to our sponsors for their belief in the community and their continued support of what we do here. On that note, we are still reaching out to people, but we're for the first time in 2 years now, we're actually looking for sponsors. So we've got 3 slots open at the silver sponsorship level. And if you or your company are interested in sponsoring, please reach out to myself or Ian on Slack. The details will be up in just a minute. And yeah. Next up, speaking of, there they are right there. So if you don't know, my name's Rob. I usually go by @Bok on most social media platforms of some description, but I'm also @Bok on our Slack team. And Ian, who you'll meet in just a moment, is @Ian. As I said, please reach out to either of us if you're interested in those sponsorship opportunities. If you don't know us, we don't actually work for AWS. No one directly involved in the organizers committee for the Melbourne AWS user group directly works for AWS. We're all just members of this same community, just like you are. And we do this because this is mostly our day job. Like, we work with AWS all day, every day. We have a passion for continuing to use it and promote knowledge and that sort of stuff. So yeah, one of the great benefits of that is that we welcome all opinions here. Positive about AWS, negative about AWS, whatever you like. All opinions and experiences and that sort of thing are valid, and we would love to hear more from the community on what your experiences with AWS are. So speaking of Slack, we have a pretty large Slack channel, or a Slack team rather. The URL of which is on the screen just there, and we'll promote that throughout the night as well to help you get involved. It's a great place to ask questions, to talk shop with other people, especially during lockdown when you can't go to the office. And we have a number of channels too, like the jobs channel, the volunteers channel, and then a couple of bot-based channels like the outages and the announcements for discussing new things and discussing when things are broken. So definitely, if you don't have 1,000 Slack channels already and you'd like to add one more for the people in your local community, jump on that one. But getting involved, that's not the only way to get involved. As mentioned before, we're looking for sponsors again for the first time in 2 years, so it's a great opportunity to get involved for the rest of this year. But we are also always looking for speakers. Finding speakers, especially during lockdown and these sorts of virtual events, is the hardest part of putting these events on. So if you do have an idea for a topic, no matter how big or how small or how niche you think it might be, let us just reach out and talk to us. Jump onto Slack and ask. But in general, some of the smallest and most niche presentations are the ones that are actually the most interesting and most valuable to people, because they may not have had a chance to experience them themselves. And at the bottom there, we're always looking for volunteers to help spread the workload too. There's a volunteers channel on Slack you can check out. All right, so not a great deal else going on in the community this month. I think a lot of groups tend to post their meetups, if they do have them, closer to the start date instead of announcing them a month in advance like we do, because they just don't know whether they're going to be able to find speakers, if it's going to be in person, if it's going to be online, those sorts of things. But something that is coming up, and tickets have just gone on sale for, is DevOps Days Melbourne. The going to be good this year. I think it's a 2-day conference at the Arts Centre in Melbourne. 28th, 29th of October, as I said there. Tickets are now on sale and will be on sale until they sell out. URL is on the website, is on the slide just there. And I believe they've just done a call for papers too as well. So if you're interested in speaking at a conference and getting that on your CV, like this is a great opportunity to do that. All the details are on the website. Right, and with that, that's all of my introduction and all those sorts of things. Let's hand over to Ian and Guy to talk about what's new in AWS.
Cool. Thanks, everyone, and thank you, Rob. And hello. As Rob said, let's talk about what's new on AWS this month. A little spoiler, it's not the most exciting month of the year.
Do you think they're prepping us for reInvent announcements, Ian?
Well, I'm hoping that doesn't usually take half the year, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a long runway.
It is indeed.
Mm.
Cool. But something that is always of interest to us is finally in Sydney. And there's two things there. It is the ML and the ML.inf1 instance types. So these are for SageMaker and other ones that use inferentia chips to make your machine learning go faster.
Mm. And the RDS cross-region automated backups. So this is a nice feature to automatically replicate your system snapshots and transaction logs between your primary AWS region and a secondary one. So it's only a subset of regions, like you can't go from anywhere to anywhere. So Sydney, you can replicate to Singapore, North Virginia, North California, and Oregon. And it's supported by Oracle and Postgres engines. But doesn't seem to support MySQL for some reason. It could be because my ISAM tables could be in there and maybe cause crashes. I don't know, but they haven't explicitly mentioned that. So,
yep. Obviously, this will be especially good in about a year and a half when we have the Melbourne region.
Mm.
But if you have databases now that can have their data stored overseas, it's still useful.
Mm.
Okay. On the serverless side, then.
Yeah, so I was really excited to see the SAM pipelines. That looks like a neat addition to the SAM environment, I guess. So it comes with default templates for popular CI/CD systems, Jenkins, GitLab, GitHub Actions, and not forgetting, although they did seem to forget it in the initial announcement, that they're also supporting code build and code pipeline, which would be disappointing if they weren't. So this will let you basically easily build and quickly build pipelines for your deploying your SAM application. It supports multi-app account and multi-region as well. So and multi-stage. So yeah, it looks like a pretty nice addition to SAM.
It does indeed. Aside from that, some updates to Amplify. Nothing major though, from what I can see.
Yeah, I think it's nice that we see announcements for Amplify pretty much every month now, I think. And these are all sort of incremental improvements, like storing secrets in parameter store, support for that. So to just sort of, I guess, helping developers support better practice around managing those sorts of things. Bit of better management of the sort of back end part of the full stack Amplify. So some better options there around how to manage those. And yeah, some stuff around data store, granting different access to different classes of users and groups and so forth, and unlogged in users. So if you're using data store, check that out.
Yeah. On the container side, there is yet another new Kubernetes version that is supported in EKS and also the EKS local. It's 1.21. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure anymore what the specific features were for this one, but I can tell you you'll probably want to upgrade to it because, as usual, this means that the older versions, it supports maximum of 4 versions. So the oldest version that was still supported, which was 1.16, I believe, until now, will no longer be supported from, I believe it was September. So always fun to be on the EKS upgrade train. Aside from that, again, not any major things. ECS additional config for scheduled and event-driven tasks. Basically, that tasks that get managed through other ways than just as standard now have all the same capabilities as those standard tasks. And ACM ECA integration with Kubernetes means that you can run that it is now integrated with an open source project that can pull in the private certificates that you create there, which makes it a lot easier to manage those.
And you're not a CDK fan, are you? So the app mesh constructs don't mean anything to you.
I do like CDK, but yeah, I haven't looked at how good these constructs are.
Right, yeah.
That said, compared to pure CloudFormation, it can only be an improvement because that mesh is terrible for that.
Cool.
On the dev and up side, Image Builder gets a small improvement where you can have parameters in the components. That's hopefully useful. But again,
again, these are all pretty small, aren't they? There's nothing really sort of earth-shattering. They're all incremental improvements. I think for the full lifecycle management, if you're using Application Manager, maybe is a reasonably substantial upgrade or increase in sort of capability. The app config thing you can compare to configuration versions, which kind of seems like something it should have done from the outset.
But the big thing, obviously, is that System Manager Automation can now do the upgrades of SQL Server 2012
That's right.
for you.
I'm sure we're all breathing a big sigh of relief about that. Yep.
I'm sure everybody who runs SQL Server 2012 still in this day and age is very happy to just use an automated system to upgrade that.
Yeah.
So that said, if you are still running that, definitely check it out because it will be end of life early next year, I believe.
Yeah. December 22. it's going
Okay.
to, yeah.
It's a bit
reach its
longer
end of
than
life, yeah.
Microsoft supports everything until way after it's dead.
Yeah, that's right. It's covered in an inch of dust and they're still supporting it.
Yep.
Yep.
Cool. On the security side,
Mm-hmm.
again, just some incremental updates.
Yeah, I was interested about the Shield Advanced announcement because it's quite an expensive service. You pay $3,000 a year, $3,000 a month for it. But if you wanted them to have access to your WAF logs, you'd have to you'd have to set up streaming them via Kinesis to S3 for the support of the Shield response team to be able to review them. So now you don't have to do that, which I think if you're paying $3,000 a month is probably pretty fair. So I'm sure that's a good thing for anyone who is looking at Shield Advanced.
Yep. At least it saves some money on the cost there.
Yeah. Yes, because presumably you were paying for it. Yeah.
Yep. Couple of things on the EC2 side. More security group rules. They now get actual IDs and tags. If you've done anything with security group rules, so either ingress or egress rules, you may remember that was usually just a case of if you made changes to those rules, they would be deleted and recreated, and you couldn't actually point at a specific rule in any way. That has now changed, which hopefully makes some things easier in the future. The other useful thing is, sometimes, for example, you would get scheduled events for your instances. So you'd get a email from AWS that said, in about 2 weeks, we will reboot your instance because the underlying hardware gets replaced. Now you can specify a custom time when those kind of events happen. So you don't, if you happen to miss the email, because it's like if all the other spam emails from AWS, it ends up in an unmonitored inbox, you at least don't have it reboot during your peak hours.
Yeah, which is definitely a handy thing. The other announcement that jumped out at me here was AWS allows customers to pay in advance, and I thought, oh, that's so nice of them. So you can now give them your money before you owe it to them, and then they'll take it away from you once your bill comes in. I was looking at this and thinking, oh, okay, this is like some kind of advanced or some kind of really simple savings plans. If you pay in advance, they'll give you some kind of discount. But I didn't see anything about a discount. It looks like it's just effectively a AWS wallet that you stuff money into, and then they'll take it out when they want to. Did you notice that? Yeah, it's interesting.
It's a very kind of AWS that they are happy to take the interest on your money.
Yes. Yeah. It did seem weird. I was wondering who that's for, but I guess it's obviously for somebody because they're a customer-centric company, so somebody's asked for them to have that feature. So that's the other interesting thing.
Yeah, it also only works with a US bank account.
Right.
So it's not.
Well, that's okay because I wasn't planning on paying them in advance anyway. Yeah.
That's good. And I think then that's it for today. So we can move on to the main items.
Yep.
Just the usual reminder. Guy, Jean-Manuel, who is also often joining me for these talks, and I also do a podcast where we talk about more of this. Some months are more interesting than others based on the announcements, but always worth listening to. So you can...
Yeah, that's right. We make it interesting, even if AWS hasn't made it interesting, right?
Exactly. Cool. And with that, I'll hand it back to Rob.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Guy. Another tour through the wonderful world of AWS. You're right, there probably wasn't a lot there this month, but there were some surprising ones. Especially the option to give AWS more money. I'm sure that was their favorite announcement of the month as well. Alrighty, so looks like Scott is just about ready. Alrighty. No, I haven't switched over yet, Scott. Give me 1 sec. Alright, so we'll switch over just about to Scott. He is a passionate developer who loves all of the agility and scalability of developing on the public cloud. He's mostly focused on developing serverless applications in .NET, but is also very enthusiastic about DevOps and helping teams become more productive. So without any further ado, I will transition over to Scott now.
Yeah, hi all. A little bit about me. My name's Scott. I work for Telstra Purple. For those of you who don't know Telstra Purple, it's a combination of a number of acquisitions that Telstra has accumulated over time, and it's my heritage is from Redify. Those of you who are familiar with Redify. Telstra Purple, incidentally, are hiring, so if you are after a job, please PM me after the event. But I'm here today to talk to you about the AWS CI/CD tooling and a little bit of an epiphany that I had a few months ago. So without further ado, I'll move on. So the agenda for tonight, for my talk, is basically, let's take a quick look at what's wrong with the AWS CI/CD tooling, or at least what's perceived to be wrong. I'll talk about the epiphany I had and why, how it helped me to understand why the tooling is structured the way it is. And I think probably the meat of this talk is about what does it mean? What does it all mean from a development point of view, from a day-to-day development process, and how can you best work with the tools? And then hopefully I'll end it with a practical example of how it all hangs together. So, what's wrong with the AWS CI/CD tooling? The first thing that I seem to pick up about the AWS CI/CD tooling is that it's actually not very well known. Even within Telstra Purple, I know a lot of people who are, very strong DevOps peeps, who just don't have any clue about things like code commit, code build, code deploy, and code pipeline. Now, this talk is not going to be a deep dive into how these the details of how these services work. If people are interested, I'm more than happy to do a talk on those at a later point. But I hope at least this audience, most people have heard of these tools. I dare say many of you have used them. Many of you probably have been frustrated with them, like I certainly was for a while. But I don't think I have to explain to this audience what these tools are. So I will move on. So the next thing that's wrong with the tooling, it's ugly. Got to say, if you're comparing it with, I've used a number of different CI/CD tools, Azure DevOps, formerly VSTS. I've used Jenkins, I've used BuildKite, and the UI for code pipeline, code build, code deploy, it's your standard AWS console look and feel. And at the end of the day, the AWS console is it's usable, but it's not beautiful. And to be perfectly honest, I've got a sneaking little suspicion here that that's actually a deliberate ploy on the part of AWS to discourage people from doing ClickOps. basically. At the end of the day, the console is a great place to learn, to experiment, to have a bit of fun and figure out how things should hang together. But for production workloads, you really want to be doing your infrastructure as code. So that's my sneaking little suspicion that they deliberately don't make it such a elegant, beautiful environment. But yeah. So what else is wrong with the tooling? So when I first started using it, I got this feeling that there were just some serious features missing. Like the fact that code pipeline is tied to a single branch just really did my head in. And there's so many different build and deployment targets that are just not supported. I mean, unless you're lucky enough to be in, say, the four regions that support Windows container build agents, then you can't build a .NET full framework project unless you want to do it in another region. Other build platforms just don't seem to be supported at all, or very poorly supported. And you look at all the other CI/CD tooling out there. They've got just a load of so GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps. They've got a load of different pre-canned build targets and deployment targets, the like of which doesn't exist in code pipeline. Well, while we're on the topic, let's just pile on some more. So code pipeline and code build, they're a little bit difficult to set up. Not as easy, not as follow the bouncing ball kind of ease that you get from some of the tools that I know I've used in the past. It also requires a fairly deep knowledge of AWS to use well. And this is definitely something people who are coming from or new to AWS, they will often struggle with some of the basic AWS concepts. And that's going to be a huge learning curve if you're trying to learn the CI/CD tooling as well as AWS. And so I understand why a lot of people don't have a great first experience with code build, code deploy, code pipeline. And look, 6 months ago, I'd have said things like, the offering lacks maturity and there's glaring inadequacies. I'd rather use any other tool than the AWS CI/CD tooling. But so I guess the question is, why was I using it? Well, so I'm an AWS person. So the first one is the morbid curiosity. I want to see what my platform offers. So I started playing with code commit, code build, code pipeline on my own pet projects. And I got to a point where I understood how I was required to do things, but I never really understood the reasoning until I was forced to use it. Of course, I'm a consultant, so you get on an engagement and they're like, oh, we're using this. Okay, all right, I've got to use that. Cool. So I started using AWS Code Pipeline and AWS Code Build and AWS Code Deploy in a real project. And what I found time after time is that myself and the team were just butting our heads against the tooling. Like, we just couldn't get it to do what we thought we wanted it to do. And we were just trying all these workarounds to make things work the way we thought that they should work. And it was during a discussion with a colleague who'd actually put in place a very elegant workaround for one of the things the deficiencies that we felt was in the tooling, that it actually dawned on me that there's something not quite right here. And that's when I kind of had this, shall we call it a come to Jesus moment, or maybe more accurately, it's a come to Jassy moment. The key realizations were that we were always fighting against our tools. And at some point, if you're fighting against your tools, you need to step back and ask why. The next realization was, well, AWS use these tools themselves to deploy their own services. So why aren't they, complaining internally about these tools? What's going on there? And it's actually even deeper than that. The tooling, the code pipeline, code deploy, and code build all came from their own experience of deploying AWS services, and it sort of sat with me for a while, and eventually I realized something very profound. That the issue wasn't that the tooling was deficient. It was just that the AWS CI/CD tools are an aggressively opinionated framework for deploying highly available microservices across the globe at scale to AWS. Now I'm going to let you sit with that for a little minute, because this is key. We're not deploying to desktops. We're not deploying to phones or mobile devices. We're not deploying rich apps. We're not deploying web apps. We're deploying microservices, API-driven microservices. We're deploying them at scale, and we want them to be highly available. This is the problem that these tools were designed to focus on. Now, not everyone is operating at the scale of AWS. I know I'm not. I'm working at the moment. The project I'm on at the moment is for Victorian Department of Transport. Our audience is purely local. So I'm not trying to deploy at scale across the globe. But this is what the tooling is designed to do. So let me just walk you through what that all means from a development lifecycle point of view. So one of the first things that I usually struggle with a team is defining a branching strategy for your source code. And it becomes very obvious that AWS tooling is designed to support trunk-based development. Now, trunk-based development is challenging for a number of reasons, but I've found in my career, if you're targeting continuous delivery or continuous deployment scenarios, you will eventually gravitate towards some form of trunk-based development. And if you are doing trunk-based development and you're deploying from your trunk, then the fact that you have a hard-coded branch in your pipeline is actually not a problem at all. But when you start to go away, you start to try and implement some other patterns like, say, Git flow, or the branching pattern that I was forced to use in one of my projects was branch per environment, and you start to try and integrate this into the code pipeline tools, and you end up in a very crazy space of having hundreds and hundreds of code pipelines all over the place, all kind of similar but not quite, and it's a real mess. The next thing is the concept of build once and deploy everywhere. And this is a classic 12-factor kind of idea that your built code needs to be an immutable artifact. So you use code build, you build the code, you get a binary, and then you deploy to your various different environments, test, staging, production, simply by taking that same binary and applying different config. This is crucial if you're doing a lot of builds, you're doing continuous deployment or continuous delivery style scenarios, because you can very easily do a build of the exact same code base two different builds can produce, for varying different reasons, different binaries. And if you test your code against one binary and then put a different binary into production, you can have all sorts of bugs escape your attention. Further to this point, this encourages highly automated testing. So you use automation testing as the means for promoting your build through to highest, or through to various stages until you get to production. Now, of course, API-driven development, it's certainly a lot easier to automate that than, say, UI development. But even in UI development, automation tests are a great way of ensuring time and again that you don't have bugs in your code. And I've come back to a quote I heard many years ago that every manual test you have between you and production is a form of technical debt. So the more you can automate and the more you can run tests every time you deploy, the higher quality that you can guarantee your end result will be. Now, of course, regardless of how many tests you have, there's always that chance that something will slip through the cracks, especially when you're talking about going from staging environment to a production environment where there's load that you haven't considered in staging. You can often get issues that you didn't realize existed. That's why code deploy in particular has a whole suite of automated rollback. This then ensures that even if you do let a bug slip into your production environment, it doesn't do too much damage before you roll it back to the last known good state. The tight integration with AWS, at first, when you're new to AWS, this does seem like a little bit of an issue. But if you're writing applications that target AWS, then the truth of the matter is you should be familiar with these tools. As an AWS person, I've found it very convenient that my artifacts go to an S3 bucket. I can use KMS keys to encrypt those artifacts. I can use Lambda to extend code pipeline or code build. I can use CloudFormation to spin up my code pipelines. That all pales into insignificance, in my opinion, when you actually look at the IAM integration. This one, when I understood just how important the IAM integration was to code pipeline, it suddenly made a lot of sense. The fact that I can have cross-account pipeline, a code pipeline that deploys products cross-account without storing a single credential, that just blew me away. It's like, yeah, that is so much more secure than having to store credentials in another system. Like, if I was targeting AWS from Azure DevOps, I would need to store an access key and a secret access key to actually give me access to that. I don't need to do that. So that makes the whole pipeline so much more secure. I think that the sharp focus on the primary use case of these tools has actually made the AWS tooling a lot simpler than a lot of the other offerings, and that simplicity also then allows flexibility within that space. Of course, you can use Lambda to extend it and do all kinds of different options that you might think you need, I would be very hesitant to a lot of teams don't seem to consider how much work it is to maintain significant amounts of code. And I would say that if you're going to try and work around some of the stuff, you need to be very deliberate about what you do. But yeah, the simplicity then means that you don't have as much clutter, you don't have as much complexity as you do in some of the other systems, some of the other CI/CD tools. So with that, what I'm going to do is take you through a little bit of an example application that I put together. This is a SAM template. It's a fairly simple API gateway fronted with a .NET Core Lambda accessing DynamoDB. And you'll see here that we have this ASP.NET Core function. This is a SAM template. For those that aren't familiar with SAM templates, if you look at this auto publish alias live, this is the secret source that tells code deploy that it needs to take control of this deployment. It means it's going to be zero downtime and hands-off deployment. You can see here we've got the deployment preferences set to, if it's prod, then do a linear 10% every minute. So that will do essentially canary deployments. It'll direct 10% of the traffic every minute and wait for alarms. And we've got an alarm registered here that if we get any errors on this alarm, we'll roll back. Whereas in the develop environment, we just do an all-at-once deployment. So let me take you through that. Now, I did cheat. I pre-recorded this because it does take longer than 10 minutes, so I kind of didn't want to spend too long. But this is an API with a number of endpoints. What I've done here is I've got a version controller which allows you to just ping it and say what's my version, and I've got another endpoint which you'll see I've got a fairly contrived production issue. So what I'm about to do here is I'm about to submit this. This is a pull request. I did this in GitHub, not in code commit, and I did this in GitHub because I wanted to open source it. But I'm going to just do this pull request now. I'm merging straight into main nowadays. Merging straight into main, and my build pipeline is set up to talk directly to main. And you'll see here we have a source stage. You'll see the pipeline has already started, and I've got a little tool here that I set up that essentially pings those two endpoints. So each time you see a dot there, it's pinged those two endpoints, and every 10 rounds of that, I just reiterate that we're on that version. If I see a new version, we do a new line, and you can see that version. So we go through the code build. That'll take a while, so I'll just fast forward that. We're still on version 2.1.3, and eventually we'll get to a point where we start to the deploy to dev stage. Now this is just deploying that CloudFormation script that I showed you the snippet from earlier, and you'll see very soon, let's just fast forward a little bit. Oh, there we go. You'll see here, first thing I want you to notice is that all at once doesn't mean completely instantaneous. You will get some traffic to the old version, some traffic to the new version, but eventually it will sort itself out, and it will it'll be fully switched over to version 2.2.7. So now after the deployment is finished, we then run some integration tests. Now, obviously, if these integration tests fail, the code pipeline stops there, and we don't deploy to production at all. But those integration tests actually pass, so we'll go on to the production side of things. Now, like I said, we have an alarm set. If that alarm is triggered, we will roll back the deployment. So we're currently deploying to dev. We'll just fast forward it a little bit more. We're creating our change set, and now we're deploying. And you'll see we start to get some errors. Now, of course, the alarm hasn't triggered yet. It will take a minute or so to trigger, but eventually that alarm will trigger. So the alarm has been triggered, and now if we continue on a little bit more, you'll see in the code deploy itself, it suddenly switched back from 20% of the load to in the replacement to 0%. And you'll see we're back on version 2.1.3. No harm done. Well, apart from the few errors that we had there. And you'll see that the deployment has stopped and a new deployment has switched it back to 2.1.3. And of course, that build will eventually fail. Yep, so that failed build. All right. So, so what's the conclusion here? Well, obviously, AWS CI/CD tools are the best in the market today. Yeah, no, I don't think so. What I will say, though, is that the best tool for deploying AWS applications, if you are willing to embrace their way of doing things. But I think if there's any takeaway from this talk, I want it to be that if you're fighting your tools, perhaps you should take a step back and ask why. That's pretty much all I have. I would like to draw your attention to the diagram I have up here. This is taken from this automated safe hands-off deployment article that is on the AWS Builders website. And this is a fascinating article that talks about how AWS gradually roll out a deployment to, across the globe, and all the checks and balances they have to make sure that nothing bad happens. And they talk about the idea that once you do a code review and you commit that pull request, there is zero touch. Like no one actually, shepherds a build or clicks a manual approval gate or anything. It's just completely automated across the entire globe. So that's pretty much all I have for you. Happy to take questions.
Hi, Scott. Thank you very much for that. That was
No worries.
really informative, and I particularly like the demo and the way that works, because that was something I've not actually had a chance to use myself and see how it all flows through. So especially the automated rollback looks really good.
Yeah.
All right, so to everybody watching on YouTube, don't forget you can ask questions. We've had one come through so far. You can either ask there on YouTube, you can ask in the Slack channel as mentioned, or on Twitter. Before we go to those, I do have a question for you myself.
Sure.
Just to put the foot on the other side, you've said at the beginning that you've tested a lot of different ones, like GitHub Actions and the like. When you're using those, are there any features of the code pipeline that you find that you miss?
I haven't gone back to using them since I've really started using Code Pipeline. I'm sure if and when I do there will be. I know I always get this. I've done a bit of work in Azure. I've done a lot of work in AWS. And whenever I'm switching between the two, there's always like, oh, I wish I could do that in that other that they do in AWS. Oh, I wish I could do that they do in Azure. So I like I said, I'm kind of for the last 2 years, I've been pretty much focused on AWS Code Pipeline and code build. So Yeah. Ask me that after my next engagement where I'm using GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps.
Yep, we definitely will do that. We'll circle back.
Cool.
All right, so questions coming in. We had a question from Kartik. It's probably more of a process question, I think, than anything. But how do you go about prioritizing which processes to automate with code like this?
Which processes to automate? I like to think that automating everything. So testing is always a challenging one, especially if your application is UI driven. I'm currently the project I'm currently on. We are starting to invest heavily in Selenium and automating that. I'm definitely infrastructure as code all the way. To be honest, my attitude is if it's not in code, it didn't happen.
Yep, good attitude.
Yeah.
Would you look at a problem and say, would you take something that has a higher chance of automation because there already are good automated tests on it? Or are you looking to maybe alleviate manual testing where you can? Or like at what point
So
would you
yeah, I
decide
guess
something is going to
yeah.
be as good a candidate to go into a pipeline?
Yeah. So the current project I'm on, there is a debate as to whether some of it is automatable. And basically, my attitude is anything that is automatable should be. With some of the testing, I've reluctantly agreed that we can have a manual approval gate between staging and production, and that is purely for manual testers to get in and validate what they feel they need to validate, and for that decision to be actually out of my hands and let them do that. Yeah.
Is that something that you would then be looking to take down once confidence in the process is
Exactly. And
built up?
the other thing too is that if you start with an automation mindset right from the outset, then you start to have to code in such a way that it is testable. And I guess this is the difference if you've got an existing product that you're trying to modernize, then yes, that's hard. You have to be very diligent about what you how much you can automate, but you have to be pragmatic about, yes, some parts of this system are really not worth our time automating. And yes, we then have to put a manual approval gate in to then ensure that we've got quality in the product.
Yeah, with some of the pipelines I've built, using GitHub, not using AWS Code Pipeline in this case, but we've started with the manual approval gate and a bunch of manual tests, and then as those have been migrated to automated testing, the gate was eventually able to be taken down. That was like a 2-year process or something like that.
Yeah.
It can take a while.
Cool.
So Kartik had a second question. He says, why do we want to focus on broad pipelines and not singular?
Not sure what you mean by broad pipelines and not singular. As in, why do you want to go from all the way from develop through test, staging, production? Is that?
I think so. That makes sense to me.
So, I guess this also comes from a key learning of AWS themselves, is that when AWS did an analysis of where the majority of time was spent, they found that most of it was spent like between check-in on your master branch to production, that code being in production. Most of the time they found was spent just waiting for people to do things, waiting for someone to give a tick of approval, and that if you have an automation there, then you shouldn't be waiting. But I think for me, the real clincher here is also the fact that if I have a binary that I've built and the only thing stopping it getting into production is manual approvals, There's there's the shorter time you can, the shorter you can get to that time down, the faster you are going to be deploying that code, and that's it cuts team agility, the ability to get code out fast that's high quality.
Yep. Yes, that's the whole point of trunk-based development, is to ship smaller chunks rather than bigger chunks.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, it is hard and it requires discipline.
It's really good when you get there, though. I've worked with some teams that have done it really, really well. Yeah. And you just have such confidence in the way it all goes through that you can commit your PR, and if you know that you just know that it will, if it's going to break, it will break before it gets prod. Just have that confidence to do everything you need to do.
Yep.
All right, that's all the questions that we've had come in. Thank you very much for your presentation, Scott.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Alrighty, so up next we have Michaela. If you're able to share your screen, Michaela, and go off mute, will be good while Michaela is doing that. So if you haven't met or spoken to Michaela yet, she is a Melbourne-based hacker who enjoys working on cloud infrastructure, radio hardware, and software. Now, there's some ambiguity here, so I'm going to interpret this my way. But she specializes in cursed software and horrible infrastructure. I'm going to guess she specializes in fixing cursed software and horrible infrastructure and not creating that, but we'll let her tell her story. Her notable works include Big Buck AWS, the New Relic Basic, or NR-Basic, and she's also notably the creator of our AWS console issues chat channel on our Slack, which is one of the best ones and one of the worst ones too, because there are regularly posts of things that are just broken in the AWS console. So it's funny, but it's also heartbreaking at times. So with that, Michaela looks like she's ready. So, I lost my control screen. Where's my control screen? There it is. We'll switch over now.
Hey, yep, as Rob said, I'm Michaela. I do whole bunch of sort of radio hacking, open source software. Day-to-day job is SRE. I've got my details up there. Feel free to reach out if you want to talk more about this sort of topic. But yeah, so today we're going to look at what are radio sondes, what is SondeHub, sort of a brief history of how the heck did SondeHub become what it was, or what it is. Overview of some of the AWS infrastructure that's used on some SondeHub, and a lot of the issues we sort of run into. It's also important that SondeHub is kept like sort of low touch, because this is a hobby project for me. So looking at how I've kept that, and a little bit of monitoring. But yeah, first up, some sort of like housekeeping. Some audience participation, I think, is in order. List your favorite service in the chat, your favorite AWS service, and tell me why it's not SimpleDB. But yeah, onto more serious things. This is a hobby project for me, so it's very different from my professional work. If you dig into the infrastructure, you'll look that it's horrible in every way. There's corners cut. It's sort of just enough to keep going, because I want to keep it a hobby and not a job. The ongoing running costs is a major focus for me. So if there's anywhere I can save money, that's where I'd go first. However, this does mean I'm not under any NDAs. So if you have any sort of question about how this all operates, feel free to ask me. The other thing is, I think Mark is watching the stream. So Mark does the station code for what we'll get into, Radio Sonde AutoRx, and he's really the fault of all of this. But he did say, feel free to blame me for whatever, so I'm going to do that. But yeah, let's dive into it. So let's start off with like a balloon. So this is all about weather balloons, but not like your typical party balloon. These are ones that are pretty large. They're filled with hydrogen. That's one that explodes. It's not the safe one. And they're pretty big balloons. The bigger the payload, the bigger the weather balloon. These balloons, they get launched everywhere, like all around the world. So I've just got the map here of where these launches happen. There's actually 2 places in Melbourne that launch. We're very special and privileged in Melbourne. We get normal radiosonde launches, but we also get ozone sonde launches and training sondes. So we actually get a lot more balloons than any of these other places, which is really great and really fun. But yeah, basically everywhere in Australia, around the world, there's radiosondes. So what is a radiosonde? So I've got one here actually that I can chuck up on the camera. This one's really special to me because we launched this one ourselves. Mark was there. Adelaide BOM Bureau of Meteorology let us launch this one, and we got to recover it. So that's one that we touched before it was launched and touched after. So that's kind of cool. So they're the payload for a weather balloon. And when we talk about like a payload for a weather balloon, that's a radio transmitter with some sensors that give like GPS position, temperature, humidity, sometimes pressure. You can also attach other experiments payloads. So as I talked about, like the ozone sensor for Melbourne, there's all sorts of things that you can do with these. So these get launched like twice a day from most places. Other sites get extra, the training ones. But basically all of these get launched at the same time to build up a weather model that's used to predict things like storm fronts and all of that, all the fun weather stuff fed into machine learning, all of that. So what is SondeHub and how does that fit in? So Mark wrote this beautiful software called AutoRx, and it basically scans for radiosondes in your area. So it's open source software. It detects them. It downloads the payload from the transmitter, and sends that up to SondeHub so that other people can share what radiosondes have seen. So it's a sort of an open source receiving network, similar to sort of like a flight radar, that sort of thing. But like, why would you want to track these things? They're just, weather balloons, who cares? So the data can be useful in public use space. So we're in sort of a unique position where we actually receive the data before any like official reports, any official data has been published. Most of the time it's, it's several minutes later, hours later, before these weather models get generated or before the data is uploaded into a public place. We're getting it live, so we can see where the balloon is live. We can start generating skew-T graphs and stuff like that off this data. The other reason like we want to track radiosondes is you can actually like find them and repurpose them. They have they've got batteries in them, so if you want your TV remote control to have batteries that have been to fairly high altitudes, they're good. But more importantly, it has like a microcontroller, GPS, RF transmitter, sensors. Like this is like the perfect dev board, and it's free as long as you can find it. There's also some radiosondes that have rewards. So the only ones that I'm aware of in Australia are the ozone sondes. So in Victoria, which is a $50 reward. Some European and I think US have a reward for returns. I'm not too sure about the specifics on that, but at least for us, it's $50 for a ozone sonde. The rest of them, they don't really care about so much. So you're free to keep them and do whatever you want with them. But yeah, so we get a lot of information and it's all sort of open source and we want to keep it open for everyone. So these things land everywhere. Like, so this is the picture on the right is Geordie, my partner, with a squid pole trying to fish one out of a tree in Melbourne. And I can't remember where this one was. This possibly was one of Mark's pitches, where it's just, on a street, but then they land out in the middle of a farm, and you have to walk out ages to get it, and it's pretty hard to spot as well. So we use some software called AutoRx to track. That's the software Mark makes. It uses little TV tuner dongles. So these are RTL SDR if you haven't seen one before. So all you need is one of these. It's about $50, and a Raspberry Pi, and that will get you. And you'll want an antenna. You can use for ones that come with these sort of RTL SDR kits, and you can sort of get going with very minimal requirements. So on the right there, I'm showing that's AutoRx, the software that finds and maps radio son data. So SonHub collects all this data, so we can see all the radio sons in one place. And the reason people use this is we don't really recommend it, but some people like to chase radio sons using SonHub. The reason we don't recommend it, at least in Australia, we have pretty terrible mobile internet. So being that online website, it's not so great to sort of use for chasing a sond if it's landing out in the middle of nowhere. But people do use it and they enjoy it, so that's good. And it's an easy way to get started as well. The Bureau of Meteorology have actually asked us for information before. Originally, their systems only tracked the balloon going up and not coming down. That was a limitation of the vendor software. Our software didn't care if the balloon was going up or down or whatever. So our software was able to track that, and there's been a few cases where they've needed that information for various reasons. So the other thing is this data can be useful for generating things called SKU-T graphs. These are graphs that are very common in sort of weather forecasting and that sort of thing. I don't know too much about them, so I won't dive into them, but they do seem to be pretty popular with this sort of data. So this is SonHub, just looking at one radio sond. You can see all the data on the left-hand side. We've got telemetry down the bottom. I suggest you just go to this website. Hopefully, like all the people in the AWS users group doesn't crash the website. Hopefully, CloudFront is configured correctly and everything will just work. But I encourage you to have a look and see how it is. I'm not sure what radio sonds there would be at the moment because there is a schedule. So there won't be many in Australia that would be visible at the moment, but maybe in the EU. So this is the SKU-T chart I was talking about before. You got like wind on the right. One of those is temperature. One of those is humidity. And I've been told when those two lines get close to each other, that means there might be clouds, but I'll let you work that out. So some of the project goals behind SonHub is a public repo of radio son data, crowdsourced receivers. We want this data to be live and open, not reliant on our website. So we want to, at the moment, AutoRx posts to us, but we want anyone to be able to make a front end for this data and get value out of it, or make a completely different application or some sort of weather model. So we want to share the data that we receive. We think that's the sort of right thing to do with all these people. All these people donating their data, we should share it out. We want the backend to be receiver agnostic, so not just radio sond AutoRx. We also have recently seen people with these little devices. These are TTGO. It's a little sort of like an Arduino with a RF chip in it, and these can receive radio sons as well. So there's a community of people working on software to make that work with SonHub, and it seems to be working really well. We've had quite a few number of people starting to use those as a receiver as well. And we want this to be reliable and scalable. Occasionally NOAA, which is the sort of the US version of the Bureau of Meteorology, occasionally they live stream this on Facebook, and they can't really live stream their system, but they can live stream sondhub.org and let users view it. So we need to be able to scale at least to the number of people that they see. So Sondhub today, we have about 437 stations, or it sort of varies every day. So somewhere between 350, 400, sometimes even higher stations. We get usually at least 300 unique radio sons logged a day. Of course, this depends. The weekdays are much more popular for radio sons. And we see about 7 million radio son data frames pass through our system every day. So it's a little bit of data. But the great thing is our users are very predictable because the radio sons are on a schedule. We have a beautiful load curve that like you could dream of, like everything just slowly ramps up and then slowly descends. It's quite good to have, and it means planning changes is quite easy. So that's one of the pluses behind not having many like users like humans and just having IoT devices. So this all equates to about 1,500 requests per minute, which is not really a lot for a commercial product, but for a hobby project, it's a lot. Like this requires a lot more thinking that I'd typically want to do. To help us with that, we've worked with Amazon with the open data. So we've got an S3 bucket that we could just dump stuff in. We abuse the crap out of this S3 bucket. We do so many put requests. Like this S3 bucket goes through thousands of dollars worth of put requests to S3. It's amazing they let us get away with that, but we're making use of it while we have access to it. So that's great. So we've also got like examples and stuff in the open data repo on how you can use the data. But in terms of like AWS infrastructure, we try to keep things fairly basic and scalable. So we've got API gateway plus Lambda. Data ingestion goes through SNS, SQS, and Lambda. We've got an Elasticsearch backend, which is the thing I probably regret the most, just because of some of the issues we've had. And when I first started writing this talk, we had a single Fargate cluster or container running for MQTT. But it looks like we're going to start using WebSockets a lot more, like MQTT WebSockets. So just in the last couple of days, that's been converted to an auto-scaling Fargate cluster for MQTT. This is what it looks like. This map is daunting, so I'm not going to stay on the screen for too long. But this is like all the components of Sondhub. That's it. That's everything that you need to run Sondhub is on here. But let's break it down. So for ingestion, we have CloudFront. I always think CloudFront should be in front of practically everything because caching is really important, and especially in Sondhub. So then we have API gateway to Lambda to Amazon SNS. And what this allows us to do is buffer all those requests coming in. So we don't need to process them straight away. SNS has that back off timer, and we can utilize that. But more importantly, the first thing we do from SNS is push it straight into various SQS queues. And these do different tasks. So this is sort of that fan out model that you might have seen in other architecture, other architectures that you've seen from AWS. So from SQS, some of the different tasks we have is sticking it into an S3 bucket that goes via a Lambda function, likewise into our Elasticsearch that goes through a Lambda function, and onto our WebSockets, the Fargate container I was talking about, that also goes through a Lambda function, into the application load balancer and into Fargate. So that's how the ingestion side of Sondhub. So this is every time a packet from a radioson comes in, it gets received by radioson.rx, and then it does a request to our backend to upload that telemetry. Originally, we were using AWS IoT actions, and IoT actions, I think, are fantastic, but they cost a lot, and my wallet does not think that's fantastic. So we've gotten rid of all our IoT actions, which I think is a shame because I kind of really liked how that worked. So here's the cost explorer graph that you're used to, and you can see the point in time that we started removing IoT actions. There was a bit of a drop. Finally removed pushing stuff into AWS IoT in general, so no more ingestion into AWS IoT. And that bill just dropped away. You can see the Lambda function costs naturally increased because we're doing a lot more things with Lambda now that we're doing with IoT actions. But I think we save over half our ingestion, half our costs in SonHub just from doing those changes. The other problem we had with IoT actions was going IoT action to Elasticsearch. I was the first person to have this error on the internet, it seems, because there was no Google result. And after I posted this on Twitter, several people over the next few months would actually ask me, hey, did you solve this problem? So this happens because inside Elasticsearch, there is a limit on the number of temporary IAM credentials. So if you have one node in Elasticsearch, what's happening is IoT Actions is trying to send a message, and to do that, it needs to assume a role in your account and poke the message into Elasticsearch. Turns out there's an internal limit that's not documented everywhere. You'll get this error message, and AWS in AWS fashion will do what they always do and say, just have more Elasticsearch nodes. So at that point, I stopped using IoT actions. But that gets us onto the real time. So what we have is users can now connect a WebSocket to our application load balancer that will connect them to a Fargate container. And they can start seeing this data as it's coming in. So I think probably all up with the entire processing chain, we've got data from the receiving station all the way to the client's web browser in probably less than 3 seconds. And this is just a demo app that I made using Cesium to plot the track of the weather balloon. This one's landing at the moment in real time. And you can just see it, and the track will gradually increase, and you can see all the other ones around it. But that's the kind of thing that you can do with this data, and it's one of the reasons why I've tried to put in a lot of effort to let people build the stuff they want to build. We've also got querying. So this is when you want sort of historic data or even just recent data, but you don't want to go down the path of using the WebSockets API. So for this, we use Amazon CloudFront API Gateway, AWS Lambda to Elasticsearch service. So basically that Lambda is just building queries to feed into Elasticsearch and then formatting it to something a little bit more sane than what Elasticsearch would output normally. So that's sort of how that works. It's not very advanced, but it doesn't need to be. So SonHub is a hobby project. So I've made this little scale as to the system reliability requirements for SonHub. On the left, you've got your home router. A little bit higher up, your parents' router is a little bit more important. Your business application. Payroll is really important. People think that the thing that needs to be fixed is the business application. No, payroll. You need to get paid for fixing the main application. But on this scale, SonHub scales all the way up the top. This is the most important thing in the world because I want it to remain a hobby. That means I don't want to be fixing it all the time. So it needs to stay very, very reliable. So how do we do that? As I mentioned before, we use ingestion behind SNS and SQS. This is super handy. If something goes wrong, Elasticsearch dies, right? Everything just queues up. You'll get millions and millions of messages in your SQS queue. But as soon as you start up Elasticsearch again, it will just process those as fast as it can. In a couple of minutes, it's all done. You're back to everything working as normal. The other thing is no pets. We use Lambda functions, we use Fargate. The reason why we do that is because we don't want to be updating operating systems. We don't want to be managing like some sort of memory leak has caused this function to die. No, so Lambda functions, Fargate services, everything is auto-healing. It's all sweet. Elasticsearch, so using AWS Elasticsearch rather than running our own. This solves a whole bunch of headaches, but it doesn't solve as many as I want. So I really wish AWS would speed up building AWS Elasticsearch to be just a little bit better. Unfortunately, I've had to get business support on my account several times to get Elasticsearch out of an unstuck state. So it's a little bit frustrating when that happens. I think I've worked out all the causes for that, so hopefully I don't get stuck there again. But yes, using the AWS services means you don't need to worry about, all the heavy lifting, which I think is important in a hobby project. In terms of monitoring, so one of the things with SonHub is it's sort of like a demo for me to like play around with things that I don't get a huge amount of experience in my day-to-day. So one chance I had was to play around with X-ray. It's nice to have. It got expensive quickly, so it's no longer in SonHub, but I can definitely see the value in using it. One thing that caught me a little bit off guard is we ended up running a whole bunch of Lambda requests. This meant that I had to slim down the logs, not print out as much, because the CloudWatch logs cost was slowly increasing to the point where the logs are costing more to run the service than the service itself. So all of those logs slimmed down. But yeah, for the most part, most of the important information is already in CloudWatch metrics. And this is because we're using AWS services that manage all the complicated bits for us. So we can utilize the CloudWatch metrics that those provide for debugging. We have a public dashboard, so anyone can go to sonhub.org/go status to see what's happening. And it's handy for me because sometimes I want to see what's happening without actually logging into AWS console, switching roles, finding the dashboard. So for each one of these, I like to put a little description of what's happening in the graph. Not only for my own benefit, but just so if someone's looking at it, they can get an idea of what it means and not get the wrong impression from that metric. So I like to do that. But yeah, that's sort of how SonHub works on AWS. If you want to learn how to chase a radio sonde, there's sonhub.org, go how to chase. Or on GitHub, we have the radio sonde AutoX software. If you want to support the project, there's two ways of doing that. There's a donate or a Patreon. We like to put more technical posts on the Patreon. So if you want to know like how we solved a specific problem, there's already a few posts sort of in that regard there. So yeah, that's just about it for SonHub.
Thanks, Michaela. That was awesome. I'll be honest, I never really thought about all the weather zones and things like that and where they go and how it works. So it's really cool to see that. So while let's see, we've had one question so far. That is from Chris Fernando. Before I read it, let me just remind everybody to ask questions because I'm sure there's plenty of interesting information you can give as well. But the question is, what role does SNS have in the architecture? Or asked another way, why not push from Lambda directly into the SQS queues?
Yeah, so the reason for SNS, you could definitely push straight into SQS. The advantage of SNS is you have that sort of fan out approach. So you only have to push to one place, and then from there you can have multiple subscribers from that SNS, and it doesn't necessarily have to be SQS. So one of the things that's open to us is feeding data into third parties directly. We don't have that yet, but it's something that I wanted to make sure is available to us, so that if someone wants to ingest our data and they don't want to, use WebSockets and they're inside the AWS ecosystem, or even if they're not, we can just set up a SNS topic subscription. It could be a HTTP endpoint, it could be one of their SQS queues, and go from there. But yeah, it just gives us that flexibility of if we're going to add another processor to the data. It's very trivial for us to do.
That makes perfect sense. I don't see any other questions yet, but I've got one of my own that I can ask.
Sure.
You've been talking about Elasticsearch and how much you love it. If you were to start over on this project, would you still go with Elasticsearch, or would you pick something else?
It's a hard question because of the way we sort of slowly ended up in the place that we were. It's sort of like right now, I would probably pick Postgres. It makes more sense for the data that we have, and a little bit easier to work with. But one of the advantages of having Elasticsearch is you have Kibana sitting there like right away, easy to use. And we already have a few users that log into Kibana and query stuff and get data out of that way. I know there's other tools that you can use and, point at Postgres. There's definitely lots of tooling in that respect, but it wasn't built into the database, which made Elasticsearch a lot more compelling at the time.
Yeah, that makes sense. The ease of just having a search interface is very convenient, especially, as you said, for a hobby project where you don't want to do any maintenance. Cool. I am not seeing any other questions yet. So in that case, I think I will just thank you for this very interesting presentation. I definitely learned a lot, and I expect that we'll probably see more of your questions and complaints about Elasticsearch on the Slack.
Yep.
So thank you, and I'll hand it back to Rob.
Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Michaela. That was really cool. Just like that was a whole thing that I had no idea even existed. But now I find it really interesting, and definitely will check out a lot more about that. Always have too many hobby projects, but you can't have too many hobby projects. So. All right, my battery on my mic is about to die, so let's get through this as quick as we can. Our next event will be on the last Wednesday of August, the same as it always will be, the last Wednesday of the month, so the 25th of August. At this stage, will probably be virtual. I can't see the world changing that much in the next month or so, but if it does change, we will let you know as soon as we can. So keep an eye on Slack or on our Twitter accounts. If you don't follow our Twitter account, it's AWS Melb. As soon as we've decided what's happening, we'll post there and to Slack and let you know. And of course on meetup.com, we'll be updated on that. Big thanks to our gold sponsor, CMD, again for their sponsorship this year. And if you are interested in any of our silver sponsorship slots, please reach out to Ian or myself. And that's it. We have a virtual drinks catch-up thing that on Zoom that I'll post a link to in Slack in just a moment. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again next month.